Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. Keep your relationship fueled up with strategies discovered by couples and experts. Because at Fuel Collective, we believe better relationships will equal a better world. You are about to discover specific insights and tools that cost little or nothing to implement to help you date forever. And now, here are your hosts, a couple who always have a half-packed suitcase and a date night in the calendar, Sammi and Nathan Jaeger.
Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we'll be chatting all about relationship styles, that being independent relationships, codependent relationships, and interdependent relationships.
And it's just going to be us today.
It is just going to be us. Something a little bit different. But before we get into that, Sammi, what's been fueling you up this week?
Nothing.
Nothing?
That is super pessimistic, but last week was hard.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Why was that?
I had a couple of chiropractor appointments for my surfboard stack injuries.
Yep.
I had a specialist appointment with the hematologist for an ongoing blood problem that I've got. I had my mum in town for a couple of days. I kicked off a new project with a consulting client. I had all the things going on last week.
So just well over capacity.
Oh, and you were sick.
I was sick. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, and we had a rental inspection.
We did. Yeah. That did happen last week too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there was more things. There was definitely more things.
Well, there's all of those things then.
And then
that had to fit around normal life and
normal
working.
work, normal podcasting, normal business as usual.
Yep. That's it.
Yeah. It was a tense week. So, but I'm sure somewhere in there was some moments of fuel or things that helped me get. Actually, I've thought of one. There was a new cafe that opened in very comfortable walking distance to our place. And one morning when I was having a minor meltdown about my to-do list, you took half an hour or so with me to walk down to the new cafe, sit in and have a coffee. That's
a bit of a novelty, isn't it? I haven't done that for a while.
And unpack what was keep, kill, combine, delegate, delete.
Yep.
Just help me verbally process.
Unpack your brain. I didn't feel like I really did too much. I just kind of sat there and listened, and you kind of got it all out and spewed it all out onto a piece of paper.
I know, but I needed you there to do that because I couldn't do it for myself.
Yeah, for sure.
Or to myself.
No, I get that.
So I think that was a really nice moment last week.
Yeah. And for me, my fuel up revolved around you too. And me being sick, I just thought you were a really great support last week, and you being here and being able to make me chicken noodle soup and
from scratch.
From scratch, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and I did a few chemist runs.
You did do a couple of chemist runs and got me some coconut water that just felt delicious and healing.
And the many, many boxes of tissues.
Yeah. Yeah.
You were gross last week.
I was gross. I'm still not perfect, but I'm getting there.
Yeah.
Getting better.
Oh, well, that's nice. I do. Not that I like you being sick, but I do like the opportunity to do things for you.
Yeah. No, that's great. I loved it too. I thought it was really, really, really nice, and just love that you supported me through my snottiness and sickness.
I think, that wasn't an intentional segue, but I feel like that's kind of a segue into what we want to talk about today.
Yeah, it is.
So we've been running the podcast over a year now, and there's some things that have shown up again and again and again. And one of them aligns really beautifully with one of our core beliefs about dating yourself, as well as dating your significant other. But, that sense that your relationship with yourself really does set the tone for every other relationship that you have.
Yeah. And the relationships aren't just about the two of you together. It's also about the relationship with yourself and that independence that you have within that relationship.
Yeah, so quite a few of the guests have shared this idea about, having the Sammi circle, the Nath circle, and then that overlap in the middle of those two circles being our us circle. So whatever language you kind of want to use around that, but this idea that there are two circles and hopefully they overlap in the middle, and that bit in the middle is where you overlap, and that's your beautiful relationship. But that if that little slither was to disappear, you would still have a really strong sense of who you are.
Who you are as an individual, yeah.
So I think it was, Miranda Claire who put it probably the most, or she gave the nicest analogy of holding a torch out in front of you and you're walking alongside your partner who's also holding a torch out in front of themselves. And there's that little beautiful bit in the middle where it overlaps.
And where it's shining brighter. But because you're walking alongside your partner, you can still see their torchlight and you can see what's going on in their world as well. And so it lights up everything greater while you're together, but there's still a really strong beam of light while you're walking independently too.
Yeah, and I think that was probably the best way that I'd heard it described. So this idea of being, solely independent and holding out your own torch and lighting your own path, being so codependent where both torches are totally overlapped and they really don't exist one without the other, or that beam of light doesn't exist one without the other, or that beautiful interdependence where you've got this perfect amount of overlap right in the middle. So what we kind of wanted to talk about today was just how we do that. We don't claim to do it perfectly.
No.
But we thought we might give you some insights in what our interdependent relationship looks like behind the scenes.
So if we go right back to the very beginning of our relationship, so I hadn't been in a relationship for...
not a grown-up one.
No, not a grown-up one ever, really. And so I did have this pretty good sense of self and I was very independent and did a lot of things by myself, made my own decisions and kind of knew who I was as a person coming into that relationship. And I felt like I didn't need anyone else.
See, I would argue that you had an element of codependence, but to your family and your family framework.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, but I feel like I was mostly independent, even if I still had a little bit of my toe still in the family network.
Yeah, and then I was very much the opposite. I was coming out of a relationship. I think we've shared this on the podcast before, that Nath and I fell in love while we were housemates.
Yeah, we were.
And Nath was my housemate while I was living with my boyfriend. And sometime in that year, actually probably right at the beginning of that year, I knew that I shouldn't be in that relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was really young, like 18. Young.
Teens.
Living out of home for the first time, trying to navigate all the things. But yeah, that relationship particularly over that year, that last year that we were together, had become really toxically, yuckily codependent. I didn't know that at the time, and I can only really identify it looking back. There's lots of things about that relationship that I have to forgive, 18-year-old Sammi for, because she didn't know what I know now. But yeah, there was definitely like over-reliance on one another to exist in lots of aspects of the relationship, whether it's like, the mental, the energy, the physical, the emotional, all of the parts, like, was very reliant on one another. So when you and I first started getting together, and I really do believe that we were in love before we even wanted to acknowledge it.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, but when in the early stages of our like romantic relationship and navigating going from like really good mates to, okay, we're going to have a go at this. Are we going to have a go at this? Like, is this weird? This feels weird, but it also doesn't feel weird.
Yeah.
All at the same time. But yeah, transitioning from out of a codependent relationship and into a new relationship where I knew I didn't want it to be anything like what I'd come from.
But we were obviously coming from opposite ends of the spectrum too, like myself coming from pretty much an independent perspective and you coming from a codependent perspective. I think we had very different expectations of the relationship up front, and we both kind of didn't really know how to navigate some of the scenarios that happened early on in our relationship.
Yeah, and looking back, I think that I was an independent person who had become codependent. I do think there was a period of time there where I was like fiercely independent and I, knew who I was and my values and what I stood for and, that I didn't need other people to validate me, but that I, and it was nice to have, but I didn't need it.
Yeah.
And then sometime in the duration of that relationship, I lost a lot of that and became incredibly codependent.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a little bit of our origin of the stages of relationship. But now, maybe we've never had the language for it, but I think we do really actively strive for an interdependent relationship. So if an independent relationship is kind of two people who are fiercely living their lives, going after what they love, doing what's aligned with their values, they're strong. They know who they are and where they're going.
Yeah. But the difficulty about two independent people coming together for a relationship is that they may not have that crossover of their beams of their torch.
Yeah, I definitely know we've got some mates who seem to live quite independent lives, and their overlap seems to be
very small.
Yeah, their beams of light are quite narrow.
It feels like you might not bump paths all that often, and therefore you don't actually get that depth or that real intimacy within the relationship.
Yeah, so on reflection, like some of the traits of a really codependent relationship being like, doing absolutely anything to hold on to the relationship because I had no sense of who I would be outside of that container, feeling valued only when I was needed, being really concerned about the other person's like wants and needs and not really considering my own, and, struggling to identify what were my own needs or emotions, but also just heavily reliant on one another for everything.
And I think that's then the opposite for myself, thinking basically only about myself and what I wanted to do and not necessarily considering what my impact on you would be for doing certain things. So it was a very interesting time trying to navigate some of those early circumstances.
Yeah, so now we shoot for, what we now know is called an interdependent relationship. Probably would have been handy to know that term many, many, many years ago.
Yeah, definitely. would have been good to know it much earlier. So the goal of an interdependent relationship is really that we're fine apart, but we're better together. And that's really what we're striving to be.
I think we're better together.
I think we're better together as well.
But I'm also pretty awesome about you. Yeah, and I think it's about, we choose to be together.
We're not relying on the other person to be there to be able to survive or to be able to have a sense of self or to be able to have a sense of purpose or anything like that. But we're actually choosing to be together because we complement each other and we really do make each other better.
Yeah. Do you think there's been times in our relationship where we've reverted to more independent or more codependent? Or do you think once we'd found our footing that we've been fairly well interdependent since we kind of navigated those first few years?
No, I think once we navigated those first few years, we probably almost got to a point where we were codependent. I think as we were kind of merging our lives together, I think you kind of almost need to overshoot before you
rebalance.
Yeah, before you rebalance. Because I think there was a time where we literally just wanted to spend time with each other and do everything together and did kind of lose a little bit of some of those outside hobbies because we did want to do everything together and not necessarily do some of our own things. But I think that we were quite quickly able to realize that there was actually something missing and that we did miss doing some of our own hobbies or activities or some of that sense of self that we actually needed independently rather than that codependence of doing everything together.
So how would you rank us or rate us on our level of interdependence now? Like out of, if one's like really poor and it's whether or not it's wildly independent or wildly codependent, and 10 is like knocking it out of the park, got the perfect balance of my life and our life, that's a 10. Where are we?
I think we're probably at an 8. I don't think we're in perfect balance at the moment. I think we're coming out of lockdown life still. Yeah, we are, yeah.
I feel like we're still recalibrating.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that too. And so we have been doing heaps of stuff together and not necessarily things, quite so independently. Yeah,
Room for improvement,
yeah.
But pretty good.
But I think as far as our actual core values and things like that go, I think we are very interdependent. Like we each have our own independent core values and then we have our shared values together. So I think from that perspective, we're pretty good.
I think that's a really interesting thing that you just touched on for the values. So do you remember the first time that we actually kind of put names and labels to the conversation about what's important to you, what's important to me, and what's important to us in context of our relationship?
Yeah, I think it was a few years ago when we were doing our annual planning one year and we actually went through a proper values exercise and highlighted individually what were words that resonated with us really closely and actually went through this exercise to identify and then rank kind of what was most important to each of us.
I remember the time that you're talking about. For the first time that I had a really big light bulb around values and identifying my own values was in 2014. It was like 2 years after we had been married, and I had been made redundant from a role only a couple of months before Nath and I were due to go overseas. And I had this awkward bit of time where I wasn't, do I go and get a new job? Do I do some temp work? Do I just like blag it? What do I do with this weird bit of time before we go on this planned trip and then like effectively start my life again? But yeah, so I ended up going overseas to volunteer and teach English in Vietnam for a couple of months. And it was on my return back to Australia where I had been so far out of my everyday life and for a reasonable period of time.
Yeah, 3 months or so.
Yeah, that I saw things so differently and realized the things that were important to me were not necessarily important to my friends, my family, my husband. And it was probably the first time that I really started putting words to, oh, they've got different values than I do. And not that being like a negative thing, but just having the awareness that the things that I think are important or the things that I feel are important are not necessarily the same as others. And that's not wrong.
No.
But it also doesn't mean that the people who have been my people need to stay my people.
Yeah. And I think through that experience, there was some level of recalibration, I guess, of your values, but there was also just that awareness or that enlightenment around that your values were different.
Yeah, I think it's just the first time I remember really putting language around it.
Yeah. And then actually acting off the back of it
yes,
too.
Yes, I definitely started making decisions that were far more aligned to me, my values. And I think they were always there. I just think I'd had time alone to sit with them and observe them and figure out what was important to me.
And they'd been highlighted a bit more.
Yeah. But I think from the interdependent relationship side of things, like I know that there's a few values that we share but aren't quite on the same level. So like they might be a 1 for me, but it's like a 5 for you.
Yeah.
So I think like freedom and flexibility is so important to me. Whereas you being your creature of habit, I don't think you crave it the way that I do.
No, it's definitely something that I do need. But yeah, definitely not on the same level as you. Yeah, it's just good to realize though that because we both value something, it doesn't mean that it is necessarily at that same level.
Yeah, I kind of think of it like if we both had $100 to spend and we were picking out our top 5 values, we would spend different amounts on those 5.
Yeah, we would. Definitely.
Yeah. So I think one of the other things that helps with the level of like interdependence is those independent hobbies and interests. I know that it was probably about 4 years ago now that I was so consumed by my work. My job just swallowed. I shouldn't say swallowed as if it was passive, that it was something that happened to me. I allowed it to happen where all of my personal time was just consumed by work and I was working so much. But I think one of the downfalls was that I was loving it.
Yeah. Yeah, you were.
Yeah, but I definitely know that in that time where I was working so much and spending a lot of time, and I don't just mean like physical time, but like brain time. Mental energy, thinking about work. That was definitely something that I had to recalibrate from when I left that role.
Yeah, gaining back that time and then finding that sense of self outside of that role.
Yeah, I just allowed a lot of the things that made me who I am outside of work disappear, whether or not it was like the exercise classes that I was going to, I'd stopped going to. Things that I used to like just make and create at home, I'd stopped doing. The frequency that I was like hosting dinner parties for my girlfriends had really like dropped off.
Yeah.
I didn't have any creative outlets in the way that I used to. Like I used to bake and cook and, try new recipes and do all these like things in the kitchen that I just stopped doing all of them because I was so busy doing this one thing.
So how did you go about then recalibrating and kind of finding that sense of self outside of that role then?
the real answer.
Yeah.
The real answer is that I went to Indonesia and cried for 2 weeks. Isn't it?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, and because
But you went there independently, so we'd already been away on a holiday or on a big trip, 3-month Europe trip, and then right at the end of that, you then went to Indonesia by yourself for almost 2 weeks or something.
Yeah, and I just mourned and cried a lot for like the decisions that I'd made and figuring out what I wanted to do next and try and like reconnect with the idea that it was okay for a hobby to not be productive and that it was totally okay for a hobby to just be an indulgent, desirable, pleasurable thing that you do with your time. And I just got so caught up with my time being
valuable and
efficient and output and I don't know. I know that's not a viable answer for everyone who's in this position to be like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to a remote island and cry for 2 weeks. But that's what I think I had to do it on my own. And it was so uncomfortable.
But yeah, I think that raises a good point that you did need to be alone to be able to work through some of this stuff. And that if you were completely codependent with myself and you wouldn't allow yourself to be alone, you probably wouldn't have worked through that and been able to find that sense of self.
Well, I think that's so true because we had been together. We'd been on this big Europe holiday together for we were together for 3 months.
And that was half of the problem. I think we were about to go home or we were in the last week or so of our trip and you're like, I'm not ready to go home yet. I can't go home. And I was like, well, I need to go home for work. And we kind of had to go our separate ways because you knew that you got to the end of it and you were like, oh, I didn't get out of this.
I haven't dealt with.
Yeah. I didn't get out of this what I thought I was going to get out of it. Although you had an incredible time being away, but you still didn't.
I didn't do the soul searching that I thought I was going to do over the whole duration of our trip and a big adventure. And we were in an incredibly privileged position that we were able to take that trip and take that time when I left that role.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you just touched on something there about something that I think has nurtured our interdependence across our whole relationship, not just in the last few years, but we have always taken holidays and vacations separately.
Yeah,
as well as together.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that has allowed us the space to process some of our own things and to pursue the things that we love too. So one of the trips that I took away was to go hike the Kokoda track in Papua New Guinea. And yeah, there was always something I wanted to do. I'm not really sure why, but it was one of my big goals and wasn't necessarily high on your priorities. So
nope.
So that's just allowed us to be able to do those things that are really high on our goals list and things that we really want to do. And I think that has then also flowed through into our annual planning and our annual goal setting, in that we set goals for the two of us as a couple, but then we also set individual goals and support each other to achieve those too.
Yeah, and I think it's not just the big holidays. Hey, we try and do smaller girls' weekends away or boys' weekends away. Or,
yeah, we do.
Yeah. And I remember earlier in our relationship, people would make comments that was weird. That we're like, oh, but aren't you married? Don't you want to go away together? And be like, ugh.
Not for certain things. For certain things, absolutely. We want to be together.
I want to go to Vegas with my girlfriends. So I did. Yeah, but I definitely think that has played a part in us having a really great level of interdependence.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that comes to mind when we think about having a really strong sense of self so that you can have a really great interdependent relationship is that the fundamentals of your mind and your body and your exercise and your personal routines and habits and practices that keep you healthy.
Someone else can't keep you healthy.
Yeah, I can't do it for you, even though I did make chicken noodle soup.
You tried your hardest, but at the end of the day, it's me who's responsible for my own health and well-being, and it's you who's responsible for your own health and your well-being.
Yeah, and we do have very different practices around those things.
Yeah, we do. Different things that work for us.
Yeah, I'm much more inclined to go to the gym and do that kind of exercise. And I'm much more inclined to do a headspace meditation or a breathing exercise, or do any kind of journaling. That's kind of more my jam than yours.
Yeah. Whereas for me, my exercise is all around some sort of group activity, whether it's a group training or whether it's playing football or playing sport or going mountain biking or something like that. And really, that's where I get my alone and thinking time too, is while I'm out on the trails or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's real. Like, we've tried to exercise consistently together in the past, and it just doesn't work for us, does it?
No, it's been a struggle. It'll work for us for a little while, but then after a certain duration, it just, falls apart. There's something there that doesn't quite mesh, and so I think we're better off doing that independently.
Yeah. So I think we've talked really a lot about like our two individual circles and the things that we do to maintain a strong sense of self and being an individual human being outside of this relationship. But what would you say are some of the things that we do that keeps that overlap, that bit in the middle where our two beams of light cross? Like, what's the things that we do that keeps that healthy?
Well, I think the first one is what we've touched on already around having shared values and like living in alignment with those. I think that's really kept us on the same page. And if we're trying to make decisions independently or together as a couple, that we can kind of always draw back to those shared values and see whether it is actually in alignment with where we're heading.
Yeah, I think that makes it a lot easier, to make decisions about how to spend time, money, or energy. And if you can get clear about, is this going to bring me more of our values or less of our values? Is it going to take us closer towards our goals or further away from our goals? It makes the decision making a lot easier.
Oh, it definitely does. And I think the next one too is our date night practice and just making sure that we're prioritizing our relationship by taking ourselves out on dates and going for weekends away and then going on some bigger trips too.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really big one to keeping that us part. Awesome.
Yeah. And I think just our practice also around those date nights of like alternating who organizes it. It feels like that we're both leaning into that practice rather than one person dragging the other person along for the ride.
Yeah, whereas in the past, we did have times where it was one person taking the lead.
Yeah, definitely more consistently.
And that one person was me.
Sorry, babe.
Yeah, but no, I agree. I really like where we are now, that you take the front half of the month to organise something and I take the back half of the month to organise something. Yeah, it's nice.
There's a lot more push and pull.
So one of the other things that I think we do pretty well is celebrating our both individual successes and goals, but then also when we share them and when we achieve stuff together. Yeah.
I think we do that really well. And we've got champagne in the fridge ready to pop for some of those occasions.
Yes, we do.
So,
sometimes even in advance.
Yeah.
We've also got some really nice rituals that celebrate success. Like, this is such a silly little one, but on our respective paydays, we make a really nice effort to just stop and prop and appreciate the person for the work that they've done to earn that money.
Which was today for you.
Yeah, it was today for me. Yeah, can you give me some love? Yes, I did get paid today. That was nice.
I did give you some love earlier today about that and about the contribution that you made to our relationship.
Yeah, so I think that, celebrating success is not just the big stuff, but I do think that actively appreciating and acknowledging the little milestones and the little wins. You know, even things like, you're always so happy for me when I close all 3 of my rings on my Apple Watch. Like, it sounds silly, but like, you celebrate with me when I achieve those little milestones.
Yeah, I do. I think another thing that we do really well is just having open and vulnerable conversation.
Yeah, I think we've done a really good job of creating containers or creating time to have those conversations. I think one of the things that we do that works really well for us is parking those logistics conversations and trying to have a rhythm around, like, okay, well, on a Sunday afternoon, evening, we're going to have a quick chat about, like, where's the money at? What are we eating this week? What's going on? Like, how can I support you? Like, all the, like, logistic stuff. I feel like we create space to have those conversations, which then in turn allows more white space to have deeper conversations.
So one of the other parts of our weekend conversation is that we'll always ask, is there anything that you would like me to apologize for this past week? And I think that in itself really opens up the vulnerable conversation, because you're inviting it in a safe way for the other person to express anything that may have been missed during the week.
Yeah, or those little niggles. Those things where it's like, it's not really a big deal, but it's in my brain and it's annoying me, and I didn't have the chance to talk about it at the time, or it's this ongoing micro behavior that's like layering.
Yeah. But it's just nice to have that safe space and to actively bring it up rather than it sit there for another 2 or 3 or 4 weeks and fester away. And
I do really like that. I feel like that's something we've only been doing for like a year or so.
Yeah, and I think it has been really great.
That simple question of, is there anything you would like me to apologize for, does require so much vulnerability and willingness to sit in the discomfort of your partner being like, well, yeah, actually, there is. You did this really shit thing during the
week. And it was
week.
pretty challenging the first few times that we did it. And sometimes still now it is a little bit too. And even being the person asking.
Yeah, being willing to answer the question.
Yeah, honestly and openly.
And be like, actually, you did do this shitty thing. Yeah. And I have been thinking about it.
It is a bit tough, but once you've done it a few times, it does definitely get easier. And I think the benefits massively outweigh the awkwardness or the discomfort of doing it.
And then I think this is something we bang on and on and on and on and on and on and on about, but for all the good reasons, is that we do actively practice speaking each other's love language.
Yeah, we do.
Your primary love language, the way that you most like to receive love is physical touch. And I've found that that's like one of the nicest things about you working from home more is that I can come and give you a cuddle or a head scratch or a like quick little shoulder rub or like touch your like leg or something.
Yeah.
Like in a non-intrusive kind of way, but like, reminder, friendly, I'm here kind of way. Which is, something that I wouldn't have got to do, 2 years ago when you were never working from home.
Not throughout the day anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's definitely something that I consciously do.
Mm. Yeah, and I definitely try and speak your love language too throughout our normal days, which are receiving gifts and acts of service. So one of the things that I always do in the morning is make Sammi a coffee and put it next to her bed, ready for her to wake up. And
so spoiled. I love it. And you make really good coffee.
Yeah. It doesn't need to be massive, big things that we do for each other. It's just those small little daily things that really show each other that we do really love and appreciate each other.
Yeah, and then I reckon the last big thing that we do in terms of our romantic relationship is sex.
Yeah.
And I like when I say like, oh, we do sex, like I mean that we talk about our like wants, needs, expectations, like how are you feeling about yourself, like where am I at in my cycle. I feel like we have really open dialogue about our sex life.
Yeah, we do.
Which in turn helps it be awesome.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of learning and growth that can be done in the sex space as well. And so we've signed up to a couple of courses and listening to podcasts and things like that too to make sure that it
never gets boring.
That's it.
Yeah, and I think the things that you like change.
Yeah, they do. And understanding where sex fits into your relationship too is really important and the role that it does play. So I think there's lots of learning that can be done around that.
Without it, we're just like interdependent housemates?
Pretty much. It's almost the one thing that differentiates a romantic relationship from a non-romantic relationship.
Yeah, that sexual spark, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. And I think like we've had a couple of people on the show who have talked about sex and intimacy and pleasure, and we've been together for a decade or more, and we're still learning things about all of those areas.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and I feel like leaning into the conversation is always beneficial.
Definitely. So I know that we're not the perfect role model relationship and we're still doing plenty of learning and growing, but I hope that some of this has given you a few insights into what we do to keep our relationship an interdependent relationship. So hopefully there are a few tips or ideas in there to help you get to a great interdependent relationship while keeping your sense of self.
Yeah, so we talked mostly about our sense of self today and then also our romantic relationship. But if you want to go over to Fuel Collective, we've developed a quiz for you to do with your chosen someone to sort of just do a fuel gauge check on where things are at. So it's on yourself, your romantic relationship, your relationships and network, humming household, career and business, wealth and lifestyle, the world and the future. And it asks some really great questions and it helps you identify what's already really awesome and what could do with a little bit of loving. So you can take the quiz at fuelcollective.com.au/quiz. And as always, we love to see where you're listening from. So tag us in everything or email us podcast@fuelcollective.com.au. So Nath, we would ordinarily do a B1 G1 project give based on whatever our beautiful guests care most about in terms of the Sustainable Development Goals.
Yep.
But we have no guests this week.
No, we don't. Well, we are.
We are the guests.
We're each other's guest, maybe.
Yeah, so what do you want to do?
So last week we took part in the Not Business as Usual pledge.
Yeah, we did. So there was a huge amount of noise and rally around Australia and their movement towards climate action projects. And there was a lot of people saying, yeah, no, we're not going to do business as usual. We need to stop, prop, and make some progress around this planet. Yeah, so because our team are all remote and we all are everywhere and we don't really have a business as usual business to shut shop on.
No, we don't.
So what we did was invite our team to pick a project to support. So we had 3 choices. So save 1 square metre of rainforest in Australia, plant a tree to save orangutans in Indonesia, support a community-operated tree nursery in Guatemala. And they all picked the one that they cared most about, and then we did a give on their behalf.
Yeah. So I think for this episode, let's give the same thing again.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
So that means
that we will be providing 2 square metres of rainforest protection to the Daintree rainforest. We'll also be planting 4 trees to nurture the environment and save orangutans in Borneo, and also planting a tree in Guatemala.
That's a nice roundup, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's a little bit, but those little bits combined go a long way.
They really do.
So thank you so much for listening and supporting our show and making this possible.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And then a last little self-plug right at the end here. If you haven't already, come on over and join us in our Facebook group, Thriving Couples Collective. And as always, we love a review, a rate, a subscribe, or a share.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.